Welcome to Thrive in the Mess. I'm your host, Lisa Hutchcraft-Whitmer. So, hey friend, welcome to Thrive in the Mess. I'm glad you're here, and I really hope you find some encouragement. I have my new friend, Hasin. We connected online a few years ago, and she was expecting a baby and was pretty sick. And I was like, oh my goodness, I was pretty sick during my pregnancies, and just reached out and wanted to encourage her. But she's here to encourage us today, and we are going to be hearing from her about walking through the mess of having a young child with a chronic illness. And Hasin, I'm so glad to meet you in person and to have you here. And we've kind of followed each other for a while on social media things, but you were pregnant a few years ago, and you had a baby, and just kind of take us back to that, like your pregnancy and...
Yeah, so I was teaching high school math, and I was coaching volleyball, and I got pregnant with my fourth baby. So she was a surprise, but in the best way. Like, we were kind of like, God, just if it's your will, then we're going to have a baby, you know? And so I had great pregnancies with my other three. I was like, ooh, this will be a breeze, just like all the other ones. But instantly from the beginning, I was sick. Very sick. And so I knew something was going on. Didn't feel good pretty much the whole time. Tried to push through it. And at about halfway, it was 25 weeks. I remember I was in class, I was teaching, and I had to sit down, and my kids were like, you don't look so good. And I told them, I don't feel good. So I called my mom, who has
had 25 weeks.
Yes.
Okay.
Wow. My mom has lots of children. And I was just like, here's what I'm feeling. Is this labor? Because I've had C-sections with all mine. So I had never actually been in active labor before.
Okay.
And so she was like, you're in labor. Like, is what it sounds like. So I went to the ER, and of course they're like, we'll just monitor and all that. So the funny thing is, and what people are always like, you're crazy. My husband coaches basketball, and he had district tournament that night. So they said, we want to keep you and monitor. And I said, well, listen, I have to get to the game, and it's a 3-hour drive from here. So I'll stay for an hour. But if we can't figure out what's wrong, and if it is just kind of like me being a baby, then I'm going to the game. And so they said, we'll make you a deal.
You are a coach's
you
wife.
Stay, and we'll monitor for an hour, and then we're going to send you home and do an overnight urine test, because that's how they figure out what's going on. So I'm like, cool, let's do that. So the next, I go to the game. Everything's fine. I have pictures from the game, smiling, fine. Everything's great. And the next day, for some reason, when I went to drop my other kids off, because I have 3 other kids, I was going to drop them off with my sister and go to the hospital. I had to do they were like, you'll stay for about 3 hours and do more monitoring. And this little voice in my head said, take her with you. So my sister was like, you want me to go so you're not bored? And I said, yeah, come with me. And that way I'm not sitting there for 3 hours, bored.
Right.
So for whatever reason, last minute, I said, well, obviously not whatever reason, God was telling me, take a driver.
Right.
We go, and, long story short, we were there for a while, but my blood pressure was so high that they wanted me to go by ambulance to a bigger hospital, because they were like, we can't deliver a baby at 25 weeks here. So my sister was like, well, we can drive. We haven't eaten yet.
You're like, I went to the game. Come on.
Exactly. We hadn't eaten yet. And she was like, I'm starving. And I was like, I am too. So she said, well, can we drive ourselves? And if something happens, we'll just call an ambulance on our way. And we look back on this and we're like, we're so not smart. And so they were like, yes, but you can't stop anywhere. You have to get straight to the hospital. So we're like,
you're like, we're getting food. We're hungry.
We went to Chick-fil-A. So we went to Chick-fil-A, go to Springfield, and I get to Springfield, and they're like, you're not supposed to be walking or anything. So everyone's acting like it's crazy. I didn't know what high blood pressure, what numbers were bad,
Right.
So anyway, I was admitted. I was there for a week on constant magnesium and steroids. And at the time,
was that to stop labor and to help the baby grow too? To keep her in. Okay.
The goal was to get her to grow as much as possible before me having a stroke. It was kind of like a race, to see what could happen.
Oh my goodness.
So I was on all these blood pressure medications and all of that. So
no pressure with them trying to...
was fine
Wow.
on monitoring. She was fine. Active. Great. They were like, the baby's great. She's just really small because, she's only 26 weeks at that time.
At that point.
Well, then, of course, they bring in all these doctors to talk to you. And one of the blessings of that time in the hospital was I was a preemie, and the doctor who delivered me came to visit me. And
Oh
she
my
remembered, she was
goodness.
like, I've delivered thousands upon thousands of babies, but like yours was a weird case because like your mom literally had you and, and you went home and you were just
Wow.
this tiny little baby.
And you were fine.
So I got to meet
Wow.
her, which was really, really cool. And she told me, she was like, whatever happens, God kept you alive for a reason. God will
Wow.
keep your baby for a reason, And so I did get to meet her.
Wow.
And
What
then,
comforting words to hear in the middle of
yeah.
that going on.
Yeah, because it was scary. Because I was just like, I don't feel bad.
Right.
Like
Right.
I'm uncomfortable. But
Yeah.
like, why can't I just keep her in?
Right.
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 And of course, now looking back, I think the biggest thing at that point was I had a lot of like guilt. Like, if I wasn't such a baby, they wouldn't have put me into the hospital. If I hadn't complained about it, they would have
Right.
never put me in there. If I hadn't pushed my doctor telling her something was wrong, I never would have had to have had her early. So that's kind of how I went into it. I fought kind of tooth and nail to like not
Right.
have to have her.
Right.
But on the day that we had her, well, the night, it was like 9:00 at night, the doctors just came in and were like, my husband was fishing somewhere.
Yeah.
And because that's what he does. He's a fishing guide. And they were like, he has an hour to get here. Like, we have to get her out. And so
Was he out on a river somewhere fishing?
No,
Like
he was
an
at the
hour
lake.
to get there.
He was
That's
at the
like-
lake. He did get there. But so at 27 weeks on the day is when she was delivered.
Wow. Okay, so were you okay at that moment? Like, does blood pressure subside right away at that moment?
No.
Or
So-
did they still have
so
to take care of you? And what was going on
They
with her
did,
then?
yes. So when we went in to have her, the only request that I had was that I wanted to watch because I hadn't got to see any of my other ones. And I was like, I want to watch
because
you
the
do the
C-section.
C-section.
Okay.
And so they were like, I mean, if you want to, that's fine. Well, my anesthesiologist and my husband were like, absolutely not. And so they put the sheet behind me so that they couldn't see anything, but I could. And so when they, they cut you open and, if you've had C-sections before, then you're like, whatever, it's fine. But the one thing that I noticed was like I wasn't bleeding.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's weird. Normally,
Is that
you would have
normal
blood.
with
Well, no, because
okay.
the doctors even, there's a ton of doctors in there, and doctors for her and doctors for me, and
you, right.
they were like, and they scooped her out, and of course she's, dead. Like it looks like she's dead. She's not breathing. And so they handed her over. Well, at that point, I'm like crying, because I'm like, she's not crying, and I don't know why I expected
And
her
were
to
they
cry.
concerned you could even have a stroke at that moment too?
They were. So the anesthesiologist gave me
Okay.
something else. So then I was kind of out of it. But my
Right.
husband, he went, I was like, you go with the baby. So he went with her. So the doctors are over working on her, and they intubated her immediately right there.
Wow.
They had
And
to
how big is
wrap
she?
them. She was 1 pound, 14 ounces,
Okay.
13 inches.
Oh,
So they have to
wow.
wrap them in cellophane's what it looks like.
Are
So I
her
only got
eyes
to
like
see,
even?
they didn't open for weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got to see her little face. But then they were like, we have to worry about you. And so they're like scooping stuff out of me. And I know that's disgusting and graphic, but come to find out that my body was rejecting her probably this whole time.
Oh my goodness.
And they said that the umbilical cord was completely not viable. Our cells were
How
not
did she even
patable.
live that
they don't
long?
know.
Wow.
And so
You
they
know
had
what's
to
amazing? I
send-
can't help but think that I didn't even really know you very well before that. And I had prayed for you probably more than some other people because of you being sick. Because that I knew that was really hard for me. That was a hard season. So that's amazing to think of that. God just sustained her
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah.
Oh my
well, and
goodness.
I know that was God telling me you've got to get this, you need to go, you need to go, you need to go.
Right.
So the
Oh,
guilt that I
wow.
carried was I constantly was like, oh, if I just hadn't. But then it was like they told me both of you would have died if we hadn't taken her the day that we did. You both would
my
have died.
goodness. Wow.
And so, my recovery was a little worse than the other ones. I was in the hospital for a week. But so I didn't get to see Berkeley until she was 4 or 5 days old. But
Really? Okay.
But
because they had to
after
take
that-
care of her, were you guys in the same hospital or
We
no?
were, yeah.
You were. Okay.
at this time, yeah.
Right. Okay. So she's born. You are getting your,
Mm-hmm.
feeling a little better, I'm assuming. And then what goes on with her? Like the fact that she was even alive, umbilical cord not viable.
Right.
I'm like shocked she even made
Well,
it.
the first, of course, my husband would go down and take videos and show me, and they put her in the little incubator, and you couldn't touch her or anything like that. But they were telling us like, oh, she's so good for being a baby that was born so early. She's doing so good. And I remember them being like, she's gonna get out of here in no time. She's strong and a little fighter and so great. And so I really wasn't nervous about her. To me, preemies, because I was a preemie, were just babies that were too small. I had never ever even thought about the illness part of a preemie ever.
Wow.
Until you live in the NICU for 11 months. And now I'm like, that is not what preemies are.
11 months. So all that they said about, oh, she'll go home soon.
Went
that
down
really...
the drain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
2 weeks is at 2 weeks old. So after about a week old, so I'd only been able to see her for a couple of days before she started to get worse. And they did all the interventions. She had chest tubes. She had collapsed lungs, just
I can't even picture
all
so
the
tiny
things.
and all of that going on. Wow.
And so surgeries to get her lungs to open and to put in tubes and wires and drains and all these things. And at 2 weeks, they had exhausted all the resources, is what they say. She was maxed out on everything. They, were at that time, thinking back on it, I was so ignorant of like what to ask, who to ask, where to go, what to advocate for.
You could probably write a book for other parents now, and all that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the doctor at 2 weeks, it was a Sunday morning because my dad was preaching and I had to call him during his sermon. But they told me, we're going to have to do a surgery. You got to stand in the hall. So they had done a surgery that day to put 2 more chest tubes in. So this poor little bitty baby's got 4 tubes coming out of her lungs. Wow. And they wouldn't let me in there, and they sent the chaplain. And then they sent a grief counselor. And I was like, you guys are trying to prep me. Like I'm not, standing right here. And I was by myself because I stayed with her always. I never left her. Right. But my husband had to go to work. We have 3 other kids. Somebody had to go home. And so anyway, they send all these people in to prep me, and I'm like calling my mom, like they're gonna let her die, like she's gonna die. Wow. And so I remember I called my dad. I was like, stop the sermon, start praying, like Berkeley's not gonna make it.
Wow.
Called my husband.
He was in the best place for you to call at that moment. Get instant prayer.
Called my husband. So my mom and my husband come up, and the doctor that night, after she was stabilized enough to just be without a surgeon in there, they said I'll never forget, this doctor said, she's circling the drain, and you're torturing her by keeping her alive at this point.
Wow,
you need to go back to your
words.
room, get ready. We can take some pictures with her, and then if she codes tonight, we're not going to do anything to get her back. Like she'll pass away during the night, basically. And I remember I was just crying and crying and crying. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't, I was just like, why would, like at that time, of course, you're like, why, God? Why would I go through this for 2 weeks?
Right.
Just to not, for it to end.
For it
what
to
was
circle
the point?
drain, right?
Yeah.
To go down the drain.
Yeah,
right,
what was the point of this? And so my husband and I went back to our room at the Ronald McDonald House. Both of us are crying and upset. And he finally was just like, okay. And I don't remember some things because, trauma, you block out some things. But I will always remember, he said, you're the one who's been with her every single day. You're the one who prays over her every day. You're the one who's faithful in this. Is he telling you that it's time to let go? Do you feel peace with that it's time to let her go, and you need to just let him do what he wants to do? And I told him, I said, if I felt peace that it was time for her to go, I wouldn't be upset. Wow. But it's not. I feel like God would give me that peace of knowing this is, she has served her purpose. Whoever she was supposed to touch, whoever her life was supposed to impact, she's done. Now let her go. I would know. I'm her mother. And I was like, Ann, like me and Jesus, we're tight. Like I would know. He would have told me. And so he said, well, if that's the case, then stop your crying. Go back in that hospital and demand another surgeon, another second opinion, and go fight for her. So that's exactly what I did. And the crazy thing is that was the last time I cried with her in the hospital.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You know what? It almost seems like a turning point
It was.
in some of
It
these
was.
trauma moments. Like, which way are you going to go? Like, we see that in movies. Like, you have that, and then it's like, which way are you going to go? And it was like at that moment, how wise of your husband to like say, okay, and the decision, and then literally, so you went back over there.
Yeah, he called
what
me
happened?
out. Like, you gonna have faith or you not? Like,
Wow.
because. And then it made sense. Like, you're right. I'm saying that I have full trust in God to handle this, but here I am bawling and squalling like he doesn't have full control over this situation.
Wow.
So after that, we were transferred. I called around to different hospitals. We got a hospital in St. Louis
so
Children's.
they didn't want you there.
No, we couldn't stay there.
Oh, okay.
Like, they were like, we've done everything we can.
Oh,
Different
okay.
hospitals
You
have
need
different
bigger,
traumas,
right.
Different things.
That makes sense.
And so there was a rare genetic specialist in St. Louis who said he would take her case. He was like, I can't promise anything, but we'll figure out maybe what's going on. Because at this point, we still couldn't figure out, like, besides having chronic lung disease, like lungs that are underdeveloped, why was she getting worse and not a little bit better, or at least the same, staying the same?
Quick question. Did they ever know why your body was rejecting her? So that happened. And so whatever was going on in her, I don't know. I only know parts of your story, so we'll get to that. But whatever was going on in her body, plus your body rejecting her, it seemed like a perfect storm almost. Like, talk about
we
messy.
never found
It's
out.
like all the
genetics came back perfectly fine. Just
really,
we don't know. I mean, I know that it was just God needed her testimony. Like, it's just because that had to happen.
Wow.
There is no,
I
we
will
have
tell
no
you
reason.
her joy, like just seeing her pictures and stuff. I was like, it'd be fun to have her on here,
I
but
know
I don't know
it.
that
I
she'd
know
want to
it.
sit through the whole thing. So
Yeah. Maybe
we might
someday.
be chasing her around, knock over the
Maybe
camera,
someday.
get a close up of her. That'd be fun. But okay, so we're in the middle of, you went to another hospital, and so she survived that. She didn't die in the night that night, but. Nope. God must have just kind of sustained her.
Oh, yeah.
Because they couldn't keep caring for her.
I mean, I know, like, some of the things that I did, we did transfer, but some of the things that I did in that hospital room, and people would even comment on, was like, I prayed over her. We constantly, I wasn't supposed to play music, but I would turn it down to as low as it could go, like praise music. There were verses all over the walls. Like, I did my best, because that's where I was finding comfort. And I was just like, God, you got to take over. But it was kind of like a tug of war, like, take over. What can I do? Take over. No, me. And so.
But that's the story of our life.
Now I look back on it.
Yeah.
And I can literally feel God's presence in there. Like, I can remember sitting on the couch and it just feeling like, someone's hugging me. And it's like, that was Jesus with me.
Oh, my goodness.
I just didn't notice it at the time.
Wow.
So.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have a favorite verse on the wall? I know you said you had verses, but
I did. I was surrounded, and I even wrote them down. I kind of chop verses. I don't know if you do that. Where you kind of like take out your pieces that you need. But constantly I was telling myself, like, trust in the Lord, don't lean on your own understanding. Trust in the Lord, don't lean on your own understanding, and that's Proverbs 3:5. And then we had shirts made for Berkeley, and the shirt said, "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer." Wow. And so that was kind of our motto the whole time. Was
patient in affliction. That's a big
to
thing.
Be patient,
would you say
joy.
11 months in the NICU? Mm-hmm. Ooh, that's a big one. That has to be from God. I don't know that I'd be very patient through all that, but wow. So those are some powerful and hopeful words in the middle of all that. And I'm sure the story isn't done. So you get to another hospital. Were they concerned she wasn't going to make it? Was anything still, like, was there any turnaround? Did things get worse before she began improving?
They did. Yeah. When we got to St. Louis, of course, they were just kind of like, what are we going to do that they didn't do there? So at first, you just have tons of doctors that are all just trying to figure out what's our course of action. Right. And so we basically just let her grow until she was 4.5 months old. And at that point, she's been intubated this whole time.
And
so
she's
she
stable
can't move.
During that time, pretty much.
Stable,
but not declining,
right.
Not circling the drain.
She's maxed out on vent settings. So, it was kind of one of those things where if she gets any worse, we're in trouble. But we had sent off tons and tons of testing. It had all come back normal. So it wasn't, because there's different conditions that you can't do anything for, like the baby will pass away.
Okay,
So all of
right.
those came back that it wasn't that. And so at 4.5 months, they basically were like, she's not getting any better, but she's still intubated, and her quality of life will start declining because she's been intubated for so long. And they had thrown the word trach around just to get the trach. And at the time, it was so scary because I was like,
what does a trach mean even? Like I've heard of it, I've seen it, but I don't know what it does.
Airway.
So it is for oxygen.
It's for, it's so that like if their airway collapses, so, you've got your airway.
Does that happen when they're intubated then? Is that why the airway collapses?
No, intubated will hold their airway too because it goes straight down their throat, but they can't move their head when they're intubated because you've got a tube down your throat.
Okay.
So
I am
with
so
a
not
trach,
a medical person.
No, it's okay. You see it in
and
movies.
You probably need to be a doctor now after all you've gone through. It's
where they, will cut their throat and put something in there.
Okay,
because they can't breathe.
Away.
Yeah. So the trach is basically you can't lose an airway that way because babies like Berkeley, their airways are not hardened like ours are.
Gotcha.
To where they just close on their own.
Wow.
So she breathed through her nose, the air wouldn't go through, but it could go through her throat.
Okay.
So they wanted to do a trach just so I could hold her. And get her out of bed because it's safer because
you had not
it's
held
more
her that whole time.
I had been able to hold her, but only for like 2 or 3 minutes at a time and only a handful of times.
Wow.
So I was like, what the heck? Just do the surgery.
Right,
I mean, it can't really get worse than where we're at.
And maybe that physical contact would be
exactly
beneficial.
Selfishly, I was like, I want to hold her and be able to at least experience my baby, especially if she may not live, to get out of this hospital.
And such a benefit to her too. Like it is that mother-baby connection it feeds on each other,
Yeah.
So wow.
So that's when we decided to get, and they were like, it may get better and it may get worse and we don't know. And so she got her trach placed. It definitely got worse for about a month. She had to be put into a coma. Like her body did not like the trach. Her little lungs didn't want to work. So it definitely got hard there. Wow. But then at about 6 months,
Did you ever regret that? Like if someone is going through that, were you like, okay, or just, okay, well, we had peace about doing that.
No.
We're going to stay the course.
Yeah, no, I didn't regret doing the trach.
Yeah.
Because if anything, at least she had gotten a better quality of life, gotten to get out of the bed.
Right, right.
And I'd gotten to hold her.
Right.
And so it was her lungs that didn't want to.
Right.
The difference in pressures. It's crazy. It's just a difference in how hard the air was coming into her lungs because the ventilator is breathing for her.
Right.
And so sometimes they try and fight that because it's foreign.
So, okay, I just a quick little thing so I can understand. So the ventilator breathes, but then when you have a trach, you don't need a ventilator anymore.
No,
it's just the air's going in more directly.
So the trach is just the instrument to get the air into the body. So her trach's only about this long. And it kind of looks like this on the end. And so it just goes into her throat. And it literally just goes in. We don't know yet.
You don't know?
We don't know.
Okay. But for now, she has to have it.
Some babies, yes, will keep the trach and be able to breathe on their own. But they keep the trach in case they lose their airway.
Gotcha. Okay.
The ventilator, you don't necessarily have to have a trach to be on a ventilator. People like on a BiPAP or a CPAP, like those are little ventilators. They're breathing for you.
Right. Okay.
So the ventilator's the machine that's breathing. The trach is the instrument letting her air get through to her lungs.
And I'm focusing a little bit on the trach because I know that is a part of her daily existence. It's a part of your daily life.
She's on a ventilator. She's on oxygen. Okay. And she has a feeding button.
Wow. Now, what does that mean, feeding button?
So she has a little port that goes directly into her stomach.
Does she eat?
That was the only way she could eat. But now she eats by mouth, which is super rare. Okay. Most kids that are trached, they do not let things go in their mouth because she went for 9 months without having anything in her mouth.
Oh,
so it's so crazy. But Berkeley eats.
Wow. So, and things don't like cross or go down the wrong tube or anything. I have no idea.
Her trach.
I'm
people
have
ask
to,
it all the time. So in your
throat, you diagram this for me later?
You have two, like your throat comes down and you have two holes. One's your airway. When people say it went down the wrong pipe, went down the wrong side.
And you
one goes
and
to your lungs, one goes through to your stomach.
Okay.
The trach is in the hole for the lungs.
So nothing
can go in there. Yeah.
So that's amazing. So she eats what? So fast forward. She is 3.
She's 3. Yeah.
So, but this is a chronic, ongoing thing.
Yep.
You're dealing with all this, and there's a lot of messy from well, first of all, before we jump to that, is there anything else like in the messy of the NICU that you that helped? Like, when did you even get to the point she could go home? I'm getting ahead of myself with the time.
Well, in the NICU, it was kind of survive day to day.
Right.
You really have no idea when things are going to happen. You see a lot while you're in there. And so I was always just felt like we were really blessed because, I've seen lots of parents come in with a baby and leave without one. And I always just thought, at least that wasn't me, for today.
Wow.
And
for today. Oh, wow.
And so you just kind of have to take it day by day.
Yeah.
Whenever you have a kid who's one of those where they just don't know.
Right.
So she did really well at 9 months. I finally got to get a swallow study to give her a bottle. Oh. And once she was eating by mouth, she got exponentially better really quick. Until we were able to transfer to Arkansas Children's because we were in St. Louis. So we were 6 hours from, 5 hours.
Talk about being by your other family.
So I couldn't see my other kids, things like that. So that's a whole other side to the trauma there.
Right.
But we were transferred to Arkansas to start getting to go home. So we transferred to Arkansas and were there for a little over a month, getting the training to be able to go home and nursing at home and the equipment to our house and all of those things.
Wow.
And she got to go home right before Christmas.
Wow.
Yeah.
Merry Christmas to
Yes.
you guys. Wow.
Yes.
So, okay. I there's some different strands here. I just kind of want to ask about. One is you're apart from your children during that time.
Yeah.
How was that for your mothering heart? And
Awful.
then you probably can't totally speak for your husband, but then that's more on him and probably other family and your children. Can you just kind of speak to some of that? Someone else who might be going through that, your experience, but what do you say to someone going through that? That's hard.
It's really hard. We had a lot of help, which was great because I know I met friends along the way who had no help. And I would always feel like, I don't know how you do this. So my biggest advice to someone, if you know someone going through a NICU stay, just see how you can help. A meal, a gas card. It's really expensive. One, you leave your job. So we were down a job, an income, and then I'm having to pay. I stayed in the Ronald McDonald House, which is amazing. If you want to give to a charity, give to that one.
Wow.
So that was, my room was covered, but I still just meals, gas, all the things.
There's no home cooking or
zero. You can only eat hospital food so much, and believe it or not, hospital food's more expensive usually than eating outside of the hospital. But anyway, that's a whole other rant. I have a laundry list of things hospitals could do better. But my other kids actually ended up going and staying with my parents. They live in Jasper.
Okay.
Because they had school. My husband coaches and teaches, and he had basketball. So he was like, they would have to be up at 4 and not get home till 10 every night.
Okay. And the timeline, that would have been in the spring. Then they would have had summer, and then she came home Christmas. So
yeah,
then
so
they
went through a whole
year.
The end of a school year, summer, and then beginning a new school year. So they finished the school year with him, went through the summer, and then we decided it would be better if they went to stay with my parents, and then my husband would get them on the weekends or whatever.
Juggling.
But my
Someone's
oldest
gotta get paid,
was
too, in the
exactly
middle of all
he was
that, so.
and he had to work as much as he could. And he's a fishing guide, so he started just taking as many trips as he could when he wasn't at school. And so anyway, it was just we did the best we could at the time. Of course we look back and he's like, I should have been better. I should have been with the kids because at the time I wasn't thinking about the trauma to them. They expected a little sister to come home and she didn't.
Right. And mom
didn't come home.
Right.
And then now I have a little sister I've never met who could die and I've never met her.
Right.
And I haven't seen my mom in, months.
Wow.
And they FaceTime me and hear the beeping and they hear, you don't think about those things.
Right.
Because I've lived in it. So the beeping of the hospital wasn't scary to me.
It became your new normal. Right.
But my 7-year-old, if she hears an ambulance, will immediately start crying because it's coming for her sister. Just little things like that I didn't think about at the time.
Wow.
So my oldest was 10 at the time that Berkeley was born.
Wow.
So I had a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and then Tegan was 3.
So still young.
4. She was 4.
Right. No teenager in the mix to like kind
Right.
of maybe
So
help
she
with.
was 4. And so the separation anxiety, we still deal with that with my
Oh, I
youngest.
bet.
Just thinking every time I leave, I may not come back. And every time I take Berkeley to the hospital to an appointment, because it's happened where we go to an appointment, we
Right.
don't come home for 2 or
Do
3
you take
weeks.
her along sometimes just because of that? But that's hard because if it's a doctor's
Yeah.
appointment, that's a little much to.
And the hospitals are weird about who they let come in,
Right,
and
right.
so I usually just tell her like I will come back.
Yeah.
I will come back.
Yeah.
I just don't know when.
It's
I
different.
try not
Right,
to make
right,
promises of I'll see you tonight, because I
right.
might not.
And
So
I
I
know you had a recent hospital, John, with,
yes.
detour recently. So that probably, how does
Yeah.
that go for your child who like has gone through some of that trauma, the separation and
They've gotten better now,
yeah.
especially now that my oldest, she's 13. She's a caregiver for Berkeley. She knows how to do everything.
Oh, wow.
So she has really stepped up and taken over kind of in the mothering role whenever I'm gone.
Right. Wow.
And she understands all of the medical slang and she understands everything now. And so it helps because she can explain it to my younger ones
Wow.
what's happening.
Right,
And
right.
it's not as scary coming from big sister because she's
Right.
saying it's going to be okay. So it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And anytime that we go to the doctor or if Berkeley's sick and we have to go to the emergency room, I just tell them, like it may be a week, it may be 2 weeks, but like I'm going to come home and I'll come see you and we take breaks and my
Yeah.
mother-in-law will come stay and I'll come home. And so
It's
they've gotten
part of
better.
the mess of
It's
just
just
juggling
part of
all
it
the
now. I mean,
right,
they just
right.
know that that's part of our life now.
Yeah. And even in the mess, I think of what your husband said of, he should have done better. But honestly, in the middle of that,
He did the
it
best he
is
could. Yeah.
traumatic. And each of you are trying to, think through, pray through, literally one day at a time. And so we can only make the best decision on that day, and I think of even like with Rick and me, I've said this at times that with parenting in general, like there's so many gaps, even if you don't have deal with like a NICU stay and things like that. And we always were just praying, okay, God, can you please fill in the gaps? Because Rick's going to fall short, Lisa's going to fall short, and we're going to leave some scars on our children unintentionally, even, and will you please fill in the gaps with that? So,
Right.
in those moments, you kind of have to give yourself grace probably
You do,
too
yeah.
of, what, we're doing the best we can. Because what else are you supposed to? You can't like commute back and forth. And
Right.
not everyone lives in a big metro area by a hospital that's going to be
Right.
able to take care of. Yeah. And even I know I have a friend who they live near a major hospital, but the children's hospital was still their home. They
Yeah.
did not commute. It was, home.
Yeah, we still have to drive
So
her to Little Rock, and people will be like, "We have a hospital in Northwest," and
it's different with
they can't take her.
the issues, right, that
So
they
you still
some
have to
things,
go.
yeah. Even one of my nephews, he had to go back to his like states away on one of the coasts where he was born for various surgeries,
Right.
and even doing like dental work, he would have to go to children's
Yeah.
and things like that. So it is when there's an issue, you kind of can't just go do the normal. So I'm a
Right.
little familiar with that just because of him. But okay, so you bring her home. You got prepared to bring her, like they trained you. But I'm also remembering this was all a surprise. Like
Yes.
you were having another pregnancy. You have 3 children. Everyone's healthy, fine. This time things are really different when you come home. So it sounds like it's a mini hospital in a way with, it's not just, okay, sleeping in their nursery
Right.
and,
Right. Well, and
you
we had
know,
just moved into our house. We hadn't even been there a year yet. So, my
oh,
house is still not even put together. Like,
wow.
and so we had just moved. We kind of moved out. And so at one point, they were telling us, like, you guys are going to have to move to a place near a hospital. What happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? And so you get all these what ifs. What if our power goes out? What if we get iced in? What if
Power because of her oxygen?
because the ventilator has to have power. So my husband was like, we're going to have to move. Well, we can't afford to move. So we had this whole stress of what do we do? Do we stay in our house that we like and our kids
Right.
have, like space to run and play?
Everything's upended.
Or do we
Wow.
have to move to a city
Yeah.
and get a new job. I mean, I knew that I wouldn't be able to go back to work. So while she was in the hospital, I got an accounting degree. Because
Wow.
I was
You
like,
go. That's
okay, I won't be able
amazing.
to go back to teaching. So what could I do from home and do I like? So I was like, oh, math
Wow.
is what I do. So I'll get an accounting degree and I'll be an accountant from home.
Wow. You know what? I love that. That's thriving in the mess right
Yeah,
there. You're
yeah.
in the NICU getting a
So
degree in accounting.
so
Wow.
I was like, I'll have to work from home, but he can't leave his job. And so yeah, you go home and you think in your mind,
Yeah.
we get to go home and it's gonna be fine. No, you get to go home and
Right.
now you live with a nurse in your house, new
Wow.
people in my house all the time, which praise the Lord, we have had really great nurses that are a part of our
It
family,
still is
but
someone
you
who's
still
not
have someone
family.
new in your house
Right.
knowing all your business. And
Right.
how can you
Right.
keep it normal for your other kids? Because this is their
Right.
childhood that now is marred by
Yeah.
medical stuff.
Yeah.
It's crazy things. Like I had to make sure that our backfield, a helicopter could land in it. So we had to call Aerovac, make sure they can land out there, make sure that the lines are not too close. And,
Oh, wow. This
we
sounds
had
like a
to,
movie set trying
yeah,
to like
we
prepare
had to get a
Wow.
generator, like buy a big, huge generator so that
Right.
it can keep everything going. And
So many
there's
details
a
that you
ton of
don't
details
think
you do not
of.
think about. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness. I'm just trying to process all of
Yeah.
this even. And okay, so you're home and things are, I even think of when we brought our babies home, it was like you feel a little like, okay, we're like, it's just us now.
They let me
And
take this baby home. Now what do I do?
we're in charge and like, things, and that's a lot. But then to have all like the medical things to deal with. But today then, your everyday, what does that look like? Because I'm sure you have to keep, things clean. Like, do you have to clean a drink? I have no idea.
You do. And so
It's
when
like,
she first came home, I had, of course, talked to multiple parents in the same situation. A lot of parents that I talked to, that was their only child. So I had to think of how am I going to protect my medically chronically ill child, but not take away from the childhood of my other kids.
right.
I'm
right.
not going to be able to homeschool all of them because it's a full-time job taking care of Berkeley. I can't homeschool them, but they go to public school. Like I'm not going to make them not play on sports teams or not go to their
Right,
friends'
right.
houses. Things like that. So I had to really think about it. My husband and I had to talk about, like, are we going to let visitors come over? Yeah, I have a huge family. I'm not going to not have people come over. So I am probably I don't know that I'm a great example. Well, I am a good example, but I am not one of those, like, neat freak, clean freak. I treat Berkeley just like any other child.
Wow.
To an extent, obviously.
Right.
But I just was like, we're going to have common sense.
Yeah.
We're going to wash our hands. If you're sick, you're not going to be around her. If you're sick, you can't come over. Like things like that.
Right.
And so that's kind of how we chose to run it at our house.
Yeah.
So even today, I treat Berkeley just like any other 3-year-old. She just has extra accessories, is what we always say. Like she just
love
has
that.
cool
It's
equipment.
like a Barbie doll.
Yeah.
American Girl doll with accessories.
She, it's not like most little kids where I could transition her to a toddler bed. And I am about to transition her once I get a bed, but it's just, you have to think
Right.
about, because she has a station set up in our living room for all of her stuff, and then she has a station in her bedroom for all of her stuff.
Okay.
And so
all her medical stuff, you're saying.
Yeah.
Just okay.
So, her closet isn't cute and full of cute clothes. It's like medical equipment and boxes and stacks of supplies, and then there's clothes
is
all
anything
the way
pink?
in the back.
Oh, is there anything pink? Can you like paint the medical equipment like something pink? Or
You can't
make it
accessorize medical
fluffy,
equipment, yes.
frilly.
But she doesn't know any different.
Right.
One thing about
It's her
it is,
normal.
I get the comment a lot, like, how could you do that to her and make her be on the leash and make her be tied to an event? She has no idea that that's not normal. She'll go up to her cousins and lift their shirt up to see where their milk goes. She doesn't know that all babies' milk doesn't go into their belly like hers does.
Right.
Or if they have to take medicine, she'll be like, in their button.
That's her normal.
Because she thinks you're weird.
Yeah.
If they think it's weird for her, she thinks you're weird. Like, why do you not have the things I have?
Right. My husband actually did modeling as a child.
Oh, really?
They all did. Their whole family did. So he just was like, well, everyone does. He goes to kindergarten. It's like, everyone's a model.
Yeah.
So I totally get that's her normal and she doesn't know any different. And I know one of my friends, told me her daughter is in a wheelchair, and she's like, it's like being left-handed. You don't view it as, it's just, but, well, we'll get to something. We'll talk about like how people, do they talk to you?
Yeah.
Like when there's someone, other than saying, are they, why is she on a leash and things? But okay, so your day today is, does she wake up in the night? What do you do?
We're
Will
very
she,
routine. That's one thing about her. As far as she goes, she's still the only thing she has wrong with her is her lungs. It's very rare that a kid who's been on oxygen their whole life, who went through periods of being, in a medically induced coma and things, don't have other deficits, brain, heart.
Really?
All of that.
So she has no other deficits.
To this point, we have no deficits logged that we know about. But
That's amazing.
There are things with her that are tendencies that aren't normal, but it's things like her routine can't change. She's very, like if you approach her and you have anything that looks like a needle, she's going to like immediately want away from you.
That's understandable.
Like things like that. Like the things,
right.
She can't lay on a flat surface, a hard surface. She's scared of hard surfaces. Like it's weird little things like that.
Interesting.
But outside of that, she's completely normal.
But we all have idiosyncrasies like that.
Yeah, she runs, she jumps, she eats, she plays, she jokes, she laughs, she sings. She does all the things.
She looks like she is such joy.
A typical day, she is. She's never, I'm not going to say that. She does throw fits now, but she's
Don't
never felt sorry for herself. She's never acted like a sick kid, is what I always say. Like she's the happiest sick kid you'll ever meet. Like she doesn't ever let it slow her down.
Wow. But a lot of that comes from you guys as parents, I feel like too, of just because our children take our cues from us as parents when we're walking through a crisis or trauma. So how beautiful that she doesn't view herself that way.
I don't let people treat her any different either. Like you're not going to treat my child like a sick kid.
Wow.
Because I always say like she's not sick, she's just different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that there are limitations, but you're not letting the limitations limit you.
No, we'll figure out a way to make it work. Yeah, we'll figure out a way to let it happen.
And something probably a little controversial in some ways. You have let her go. Well, not swimming, but be in the water.
I have, yes.
And so, a little pool.
We have a pool at our house. All my kids were big water people. And so she, of course, if water gets in her trach, she'll drown and die. Like it's a very dangerous thing. There's nothing you can do once there's a hole in her neck, straight to her lungs,
Right.
So we taught all of our kids, like, she absolutely cannot get water in her throat. With a bath, she always loved baths. In the NICU, I brought in a whole thing, like a tub and everything, and I would always do bath time and lavender and bubbles and so it's always been her thing. She loved the water, so I was like, she's gonna love getting in the pool. Well, she can sprint now and be off of her ventilator, which means that she's disconnected from the ventilator, and so she just has her trach, which is still open access.
I was
to
picturing
her
her
lungs.
sprinting to the pool.
No.
I'm like,
it's called a sprint because it's basically her lungs getting to work on their own.
Gotcha.
Kind of like a sprint, like a sprinter would.
I was picturing her run into the pool. I'm like,
she will do that. But I've also taught Berkeley. She knows what it means to die. And she'll say they died. Like, if it's a movie or something, like she's 3 and she knows what death is.
Wow.
So I told her, if you get in that water without mommy or daddy, you will die. Because she will,
Wow.
So she knows, and she'll tell you, can't go in the water, I die.
Wow.
And so she waits.
Yeah.
We put on her little life jacket. And a couple of weekends ago, I think, it was her first time to get in there. And I bought her this raft. And so my husband put her in the raft with her little life jacket on and rode her around on the waves, and let her splash her feet and stuff. So she can't get in past her, her belly button.
Right,
and
right.
Obviously without someone holding her, but she loves it.
Wow.
Every day she wants to go swim. So.
I think it's beautiful that you, again, are finding ways to let her love life and enjoy life and not feel like she's sick, that she has limitation, and which she does. She may feel that more as she's older, but honestly, you're just letting her, do the things. So this sprint thing, how long can she be off the ventilator?
Well, right now, it really depends. We had worked up to 3 hours, and then she got sick and went back down to not being able to get off at all. So every time she gets
Oh,
sick, it kind of lungs are like a long game. You run and you fall down the hill. You run and you fall down the hill.
wow.
So right now, knock on wood, she's up to about 3 hours
Oh,
most
back up
days.
again. Okay.
It just depends.
So in other ways, does she have like a ventilator in her bedroom then for sleeping, and then one in the living room where she plays,
No, we move
or,
it
or
with her.
you just move it with
Yeah.
her?
So I
Okay.
have one that's connected to a pole that stays at home, and I have one that I can carry with me, like to the car and stuff.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it just moves with
Wow.
her.
Okay. So, what would you tell someone? I want to jump back to NICU. What would you tell a mom there? I'm going to start with a mom,
Okay.
but also if you can touch on like a dad, because sometimes one of them can be there. Sometimes
Right.
it's the dad, sometimes it's the mom. Sometimes, neither of them can be there. Sometimes both of them can be there.
Right.
Sometimes, one. So, can you just kind of touch on whether they're there in person, whether they're not, what would you say to them in that moment? Like, how do you walk through that mess? That's a lot.
Number one, I think, because when you stay in the NICU, there are babies who their parents are there. There's some who they aren't there, and you never know what the reason is.
Right.
Because, life is still happening. You still have to work.
Yeah.
Some people still have other children. Some people are single moms. Some people maybe are single dads. Maybe mom's not even around.
Right.
So you just never know. And so whatever the situation is, I think that grace is a big deal. You have to just give yourself grace. Like those doctors and nurses are there. They'll do their job and keep that baby alive. I know I always felt so guilty leaving the hospital, but it's so important to leave the hospital.
Yeah. Probably just for your mental well-being.
Exactly.
Right. Right.
And then like to go, I always felt like I felt guilty to leave Berkeley to go visit the kids because what if something happened while I was gone? But then I felt guilty not going and visiting my other kids
Right.
because, they need mom too. So I think that it's just really important to talk if you are, as a couple and figure out what is a game plan that we can do. The sad reality for Pete and I is that like we didn't get to have a relationship at that point. We were partners trying to make it work.
Right.
Like we couldn't
right.
focus on when do I get to see you? Like he
Yeah.
came to visit a few times but he'd be there the day,
Right.
And he made that work, but if that can't happen, you just have to be like, what are we going to do? Who's going to take
Right.
what? And
Right.
split up and divide and conquer is what we had to do.
Because life keeps going, like
Because
you
you do
said.
still have life going on.
Yeah.
And you
Ooh.
have to prioritize yourself too. I mean,
How do
it's
you do
hard
that in the middle of
to
that?
focus and looking back now, I am like, oh, here's what I would do different. One thing I did do while I was in the NICU is I got a routine going, and for me, that helped me get up in the mornings because
Right.
chronic stress really, it's real. It really is
Wow.
something that will just tear you down.
Right.
So finding that routine, and then if you're sitting in a NICU, like I was, and gonna be there a long time, hobbies,
Right.
reading. I made bracelets. I wrote in a journal. I read books. I did all kinds of things to keep myself busy throughout the day. And one thing that I did do while I was there is I found a spa that had a monthly membership, and I would go. I would make
Wow.
myself go get a massage once a month.
Good for
And it was just something
you.
silly, but it's just
No,
one of
but
those
if it keeps you
things
going,
because
right?
it got you out of the hospital and you
Right.
got to forget where you were at for an hour.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you can go back.
And you don't hear the beeping machines like
Exactly.
you talked about, and all
Exactly.
it's just even if you make it homey in a way, there's still like the verses and the things, it still is more sterile. It's a hospital.
It is.
And
It's a hospital.
that's
And you're a
just
guest
a
in
lot.
that hospital. Like that's your
Right.
child, but you're a guest.
Right.
So it's hard to be like, I make no
It's not
calls
home.
here. I can, one thing I always tell everyone is like, doctors, you're allowed to ask questions and you're allowed to get a second opinion.
Yeah.
I think
yeah.
one of the things I didn't realize when I went in was that the doctor's word is not the final word necessarily.
Ah.
But in a sense,
Yeah.
they can kick you out of there. They can
Right.
make you leave. So it's really
Wow.
nerve-wracking to be
Yeah.
like, when do I speak up? When do I not speak up?
I
When do I
like-
do something? When do I not
What
do
do you
something?
do with that? How do you advocate or not?
You learn.
Or
I spent a lot of time asking questions to my nurses. You
Wow.
really form relationships with your nurses. They're in
Yeah.
there all day with you.
Right.
And I got to where, I'd ask questions. I'd say, if this was your baby, what would you ask?
Right, right.
Knowing what you know, what question should I be asking? I wrote it down. I mean, I have notebooks of things. And, I would ask just so I knew. And I would write the answers down because I
Yeah.
was in such a spot that if you told me something, I would not remember it later. So I literally had to write everything down.
Right, right.
But I learned, I asked questions. I found people who had walked in that. Like I said,
Yeah.
some of my friends now that I talk to all the time are NICU moms that I met because I searched them up
Wow.
on Facebook. I joined a
Wow.
bunch of groups. I followed people.
So community is a big
It's
part of you
huge.
walking
It's
through
huge.
this, other people in this
And not
capacity.
there is
Right.
not one there's not one path that's going to be the same. You
Right.
can't judge yours
Right.
based off someone else's, but it
Oh,
really
that's
helps
good.
to know, like, well, this could happen, or here's how they handled this if this comes up. Or I have one of my friends, she was the very first NICU mom that I kind of talked to, and our stories were very similar. Even to this day, I'll be like, okay, here's what happened. Am I being crazy, or should I like call the emergency room?
Oh,
And
right.
she'll be like, oh, just do this, and that should help it, And they're decannulated, like her baby, he's 5, he's not a baby, but they're decannulated, like she's been through the whole thing, but
No, what
it'll
does that
just
mean?
be his trachs out.
Oh,
Yeah, his trachs out.
cannulated. That's a lot of
Decannulated.
syllables for me.
Yes. But like she's just, that's our friendship. It's just a
Wow.
trach mom friendship, and we follow each other. But
How amazing
you have to find
nowadays
people.
through social media, you're able
Yes.
to connect with groups, and there's so much
It's
online.
beautiful.
Even I don't know how
A
people
lot
would
of
have done
people
it
hate social
before.
media, but I think it's a beautiful
Right,
thing.
but that's a plus then, a plus thing for wow. So community is important with even the after. Like,
Oh,
did you
yeah.
have community other than the nurses while you were there? Did you begin to have community with other people there? Was it hard to reach out because everyone's in survival mode, I would think, there, other parents?
In the part of the hospital that I was in,
Hmm.
it was very isolated. You're in isolation a lot.
So
And
you
so
feel
you
like you
really
are alone.
couldn't go. I remember there was one mom down the hall, and like once Berkeley could get out of bed, like we would poke their heads out of their rooms so they could be like, hi, but like
Wow.
I didn't, and as sad as it is, I didn't want to talk to and get close to. I did have a couple of moms that I did become really good friends with there.
Yeah.
So that is important. But it's also very hard to get close to people because you never know how long they're going to be there.
Right.
So I did have
That's hard.
friends that were there, and
Yeah.
it was awful when they left. But you'll find, I feel like God sends the people you need, because I can't even tell you how I met the friends that I had while I was there. We weren't even in the same
Wow.
like NICU pod,
Yeah.
but
Pod. That seems even more isolating
Yeah.
in a way.
Yeah.
Well, with other people, I guess. But because a lot of times, that's one of the things I say with walking through a mess, you're not alone.
Right.
There are other people who have walked through mess. But a moment like that sure feels like you are, because you're not with your other children. You're with a helpless baby and medical people, and not with your husband, not with other family, not with your students anymore teaching. And that world can probably feel very small, And so I love the tangibles you're giving of like, you found a, place you could get a massage. You could, find some other community, get your accounting degree. Like, that's mind blowing. I'm just like, wow, because it takes emotional bandwidth to even walk through carry, like even when I'm sick, like it takes a little more emotional bandwidth that we have to take care of ourselves. And then if a child is or so, and to have that be crisis mode for a lot of that time that's a lot. Did you ever feel like you were going to lose her as time went on more? And do you ever feel like that now? And can you
Yeah.
just speak to that?
It's just, I mean, it's a reality that like she could die any day.
Yeah, wow.
That's just, their hearts are overcompensating. Her lungs are the problem, but her heart is overcompensating for weak lungs. Like she could go into cardiac arrest. She could,
Really?
there's all kinds of things. A lot of trach kids, I mean, they get a plug, which means snot gets stuck in the trach tube and you don't get it out, so they suffocate. I mean, that's why she has to have a nurse 24
That's a
hours a day. She
lot.
has to have open eyes on her all the time.
Wow.
So it's a lot, but we just choose not to think about that.
Right,
you can't
right.
dwell on all the things.
That's good.
So
That's
I
good.
don't walk around looking at all the things
Yeah.
that could go wrong, because I trust that God's got that. Like
Yeah.
when I handed his situation, and that's one of the things I really wanted to speak about, is that there was a point where I had to say, okay, God, it was kind of like, it made me think of like Abraham and Isaac, just you are in control. You're going to provide here. And I remember praying, like, if her story was meant to touch people only in this hospital, and the people that I've talked to and come into contact with and through social media, if that's all this was for, you're a good God. And I'm so glad I got to be a part of it.
Wow. And
But
real
if-
quick, the Abraham and Isaac story, just to touch on that, if no one's familiar with that, it's literally God had prompted Abraham, go up to this mountain, take Isaac with you, and Abraham knew he was going to have to sacrifice his son, and God provided a ram to sacrifice instead, because that was back during the sacrifices was the Israelite people and all of that during that time. So literally God does provide a ram in the bushes.
Yes.
On so many occasions. So I love
and
that
as the parent, Abraham had to just trust that God was in control instead of saying,
Talk about surrender.
Oh, no, I'm not going to take him. Forgot him down at the tent,
Right.
So I remember just being like, if that's all this is for, prepare my heart for that. So that when she passes away, my testimony doesn't, I don't mess it up by being emotional is basically what I was telling God. Like, I don't want to mess up what you're doing just because I get upset. So I need you to prepare my heart to let her go.
Wow.
And so if we get to that point, I'm ready and I have composure and I'm good. And so I prayed that all the time. And I still do. I mean, there's days where people are like, she's normal now. And I'm like, no, she's not. Like, she looks normal, but she's really not, And every time that we're admitted to the hospital, you just never know what could go wrong. So I try and take every day as like, Berkeley's here because she's a miracle. Like, I've had multiple doctors tell me there's no way she should be alive. No way. Can't explain it. And I'd always say, I can. And, they can't talk about it. But I've had doctors that are like, you're right. And then you have your doctors that are like, oh, I don't believe in all that. But and I'd be like, well, you explain it then. And, and they're like, well, I can't. And I'm like, well, I can. God kept her around for a reason. Wow. And even to my other kids, I've told them she could live to be 100 years old.
Right.
She could get this trach out, and this will be a distant memory someday that we'll think about when
she'll be at all your funerals.
Yeah, like where she'll be running and playing basketball and whatever.
Right.
Or she could have a trach her whole life, or she could not live to be 10. Right. That's just where we are at. Yeah. So we live every day as if like she's just a normal little blessing, and God's going to work through her where he's supposed to work. And just like with anybody else, you're going to be here as long as God needs you to be here.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I ever pray when it comes to that, and with any of my kids, but it's, any of your kids could die at any minute.
Yeah.
But you don't sit around thinking about that.
Yeah.
But with Berkeley, it's like, it's a little more present. Like, it just seems like it's a little more
very
likely.
Real. Right.
And so I'm just, like I said, I just always pray that, like, God will make sure my heart's ready because I'm going to have 3 other kids to minister to. I'm going to have a husband to minister to.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the hindrance. So, like, use me how you're supposed to as her mom.
Yeah.
Teach me how to teach them, how to, just be prepared because when you're living with a miracle, like God can use it and then he can also take it. So we have to be ready. But
and we're not promised tomorrow. I say that a lot in regards to when my mom passed away several years ago, that literally my oldest graduated from high school and she was there and celebrating and all the things, gone the next day of sudden heart attack. So we're literally not promised tomorrow, but we can choose to live in today. And I love how you're doing that, just on so many levels. And we just treasure those moments. So I love that. I can't help but think of, there's a verse in Isaiah. After my mom passed away, I was really ready for my oldest to go to college. Like, he was ready and I was good with that. Like every parent, we have to have that release, whether it's in the NICU or when they go to college, we kind of have to get to that moment and how are we going to handle it? And I was like, oh, this is great. Your child's ready and things. But then my mom died and I didn't want anyone to leave. I wanted all my people kind of close by. And God had to kind of, there's a verse in Isaiah and it basically is saying, the Lord goes before you. The God of Israel is your rear guard. And I'm like, okay, the God of Israel, let's see, Lisa, what did he do? Oh, let's see, he parted seas for his people to walk through. He provided food in the wilderness, with manna, like daily food. And I, just, okay, God, can I trust you with my child? And I hear you saying that too. Can I trust you? And the Lord goes before my son. It literally was that moment where I'm like, okay, I'm okay with this, because I really wasn't. I was, and then I wasn't. I'm like, I can't, And he was going to go off to another state and all for college. And you went through that, and I love that. The Lord goes before your daughter. The God of Israel is her rear guard, so we're surrounded, we're protected,
Yeah.
God's pretty powerful. But we always think we're the one who can do all the things. Like, I always am like, oh, wouldn't it be better to, have our child just in our living room when they're nice and safe, everything's childproof, they can't stick their finger in the plug and all that. But we either trust God or we don't,
Right.
with
Well, and
our
it's
child.
as a believer, I know that like she's not mine. Like this child is not mine.
Wow.
I was trusted to raise her.
Wow.
I was trusted to advocate for her and to teach her, but
Yeah.
ultimately none of my children are mine. So I have to remind myself of that sometimes. Is like, thank you, Lord, for giving them to me while they're here on earth. Like, thank you
Yeah.
for trusting me with them. But like, don't let me mess them up. And like,
Wow.
you're ultimately in control. They're
Yeah.
your children, just like I'm your child.
Mm.
And so it's hard. And I think that one of the biggest things with Berkeley, a lot of people say, well, if you knew she was going to turn out like this, would you have aborted her? Or would you have not done it? Would you have let her go whenever the doctor told you to? And
Right.
absolutely not. Like it uprooted my life. My life is completely different. Never would have ever imagined that I would be here. But my faith mostly grew exponentially. I mean, when I say I could feel Jesus and feel God's presence, I think we were talking about that before we started recording, but like sitting there with me, like it's true, to the point where I'm like, he became less of a person I've prayed to and read about and believed in because I felt the Holy Spirit move before, to a like physical person. I just can't see him, but I can feel him. Like he became so real to me during this walk with Berkeley, and I wouldn't give it back for nothing. I mean, even if, the Lord calls her home and this was all for nothing, as some people would say, this has been the best experience of my life.
Oh my goodness.
So
wow. And she has such joy.
She does. She's contagious.
And just spunk.
Yes.
It's like.
She is the light of the room.
Wow. Isn't that amazing? And she almost didn't make it. And I think at one point, we've already touched on, like, if your child might not make it, you had mentioned something about in your journal where you kept different things. And one day you said, today you almost died.
Yep.
Or something like that.
She did. We had a day where after she got her trach placed and she was having trouble, like her body adjusting, before they put her into the medically induced coma, she just kept coding and kept coding. And so they would have to take her off and bag her. And so, if you watch medical dramas, then that's where they do the little bagging for air. Basically what that does is
tiny.
It will pop your lungs open really fast. And so it makes your lungs open, and then do CPR. And so of course her little body, I mean, at 2 months old, I was reading through this journal earlier, and I think at 2 months old, I put in here, you finally weigh 2 pounds, and she's 2 months old. Yeah. And so she wasn't very big, and you're sitting there doing CPR with 2 fingers on a little baby. And she coded so much that the doctor and the nurses just pulled chairs into her room, and we just all sat in there and we stayed all night long. And I remember that next day they were like, we're going to put her into a coma, let her body rest. And so then that's even worse because you have this baby who's literally looks like a little dead baby.
Right,
I mean, they're in a coma.
Wow.
And for them...
And you're alone, too.
Yeah. And so you don't know because they're on a ventilator. They're on life support. She lives on life support. That's the gravity of the situation. Right. So you have no idea, is she alive or dead? Because she's on life support.
Right.
So... but that was one of the things I wrote in here was, I wrote a journal for her so she could look back and read it someday, what all she went through. And so sometimes I would kind of joke and you were a real punk today or, whatever. One day there's you pooped on a nurse today and it was hilarious. But on that day, literally all it says is you tried to die today.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I mean, I'm sure at that point I was like, I can't even like elaborate on it because I'm so exhausted. So I didn't. It just, that's all it says. It's so morbid.
You can tell the emotional bandwidth again. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I've had it, but I want you to know
I
this.
didn't elaborate. I just, you tried to die today.
And some of those things sounds like you can read them at her wedding someday.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I haven't read through it. I mentioned that to you earlier. I grabbed it today to bring with me, but I haven't read through it. And so I'm like, I need to because I need to see what's in there.
I have a question. I love to look for God sightings in the middle of challenging times or just even our everyday. It doesn't even have to be challenging. Do you have a particular God sighting, like where God just shows up and you're just like, wow, in the middle of it? It can be, I've literally had someone after my mom died offered to bring me my favorite Sonic drink, and while I was writing her obituary, that was a God sighting that day, but do you have a favorite one or two that you're like, this is where I like you've talked about where you felt like God literally was next to you in the room, but are there other moments either in the hospital or since, or even now, even your recent hospital stay, just anything that really jumps out like, wow, God?
I'm sure there's a lot that I just would have to really think about.
Right.
But the first thing that came to mind when you said that is we had a nurse that she had not been working in the NICU or something, and she just happened to like come back to the NICU, but for whatever that reason was, but she ended up being, when she first came in, she was so cranky. Ooh. And they would walk in and I'd be like, nope, like we're not going to jive, like, and she was the one that I was like, man, she's hateful.
Oh,
and I'm already in a bad mood, so I'm like, and I don't remember that she was ever hateful to me, but she just looked hateful, and I was like, okay, I don't need that kind of negativity around me. Yeah. And so I remember the first couple of times she was super dry, and I have a very dry sense of humor, but like when I'm in a bad mood, it's like poking a bear.
Drier.
To where I'm like, what did you just say to me?
Oh, no.
And so I remember like we didn't really get along the first couple of times, but then over whatever time being, she ended up being like my family in the hospital. She stayed with Berkeley. She took extra shifts if she knew that a certain if a doctor was going to be off, or if she thought that they might turn the ventilator, like they might do something wrong, or if Berkeley was really, really sick, she would take extra shifts and stay with her so that I could go sleep.
Goodness.
And she was an angel, absolute angel. Wow. I know she was. And she, like I said, was like family. She would bring me food. She would,
and the least
come on her days off to sit and make sure that I got out and like walk Target or did something else besides sit in there.
Right.
And even like, after we left the hospital, we stayed in contact, and she was definitely someone that I know God was like, stop being stubborn. Like, I'm sending her to you.
Wow.
And I hope that she can look back on that and be like, it was a mutual touching experience, but she was definitely someone that I was like, God, he put you here because he knew that I needed someone on my side.
At the first moment.
No, I didn't. It was very,
least
very
likely
unlikely
heroes in our lives, and wow.
But we had the whole time we had people who helped us with so many things. Money is always a stressor when you're a medical family.
Well, that's what I'm wondering. What else I know earlier you mentioned, how do you reach out and encourage someone in that moment? Like you mentioned gift cards or, different kinds of
money,
things.
I would say is like, besides just the illness, money is the biggest stressor. And I know right now it's probably the biggest stressor for everyone, but you wonder like.
But you were down in income.
And just the cost of keeping her alive every day. I mean, it's crazy.
I can't imagine the medical.
And you just, God will provide. You just have to keep that in mind. And that's still something we stress about to this day. My husband and I, we still are like, what are we going to do? And you just got to do what you can do. You know, if you're looking to help someone who's in the NICU, if they're like me, I hate asking for help. I would never admit to needing help.
Right.
But they're not going to say it.
Yeah.
But, like getting
just
the random,
offer.
I would have friends text me and be like, I Venmo you $10 for coffee. Go get a coffee. And that would just be such a uplifting thing. Or mail me a book, or because Amazon will ship to a hospital. Like people don't know that. It's like you can ship to a hospital to a patient.
Right.
Send them a care package or a meal. Grubhub cards or
Right,
DoorDash
right.
cards, you know, things like that. It doesn't have to be big. And I think that
Right.
that's a thing is you feel like when you're going to help someone, you're like, oh, I don't have $100 or $200 or whatever to help. $5 is
Yeah.
a coffee and it brightens their
Right.
day. You know, like
Right.
it's just nice to be like, I wasn't going to get a coffee because I can't waste money like that. But now that
Yeah.
someone sent it to me, I can go to
Then I
Starbucks.
Going
You
to
know,
Starbucks.
because it wasn't,
And
I'm
that's
not
a lot of
wasting
days
it.
that can be brightened because you're in there for days, weeks, and
Yeah,
months.
my
and
DoorDash card
wow.
never ran out. And even
Wow.
now, when I'm in the hospital with her, you know, like it costs me $30 a day to eat at the hospital. Well, that adds up whenever you aren't
Right.
working.
Right.
And I just actually finished a DoorDash card from when she was in the NICU. Like I've been able to use it
Oh,
on our hospital visits.
wow.
So, you know, it's just such
Right.
simple things.
Yeah.
We, of course, did have people who were like, we're going to pay your electric bill or we're going to, you know, and it was like, you just
Wow.
feel so unworthy.
Right.
But
And so loved, and it just
at the
helps
yes, at
to
the
have
same
other
time,
people
but it's
come
like
in.
you feel so unworthy of it. Like
Wow.
other people, and I would say that all the time. Other people have it so much worse than we do.
Wow.
You know, like
wow.
I
Yeah.
can't accept the help. Like other people have it so much worse than we do.
And that's a pride thing
And
sometimes,
it is
to just
because
let people step in.
finally, I don't know who told me that, but it was like, don't rob people of the blessing.
Right.
And so
right.
now I always tell myself, don't rob people of the blessing. Like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
but
I've had moments like that too, and that is, you know, allowing someone to step in and help carry the load. And what you've touched a little on this with some people who are like, okay, well, you wouldn't have to have the medical cost. You would still be having two incomes. You know, she's attached all the time. What, you know, just any final thoughts on that?
I mean, I think that for other people, especially in the beginning, my other kids would be like, people are staring. People are staring. And little kids, I love it. Little kids have no filter and they'll say, what is that? You know, like, what's wrong with her? And I always laugh and I'm like, well.
And their parents are like,
and
shh.
yeah, and they're like, don't. And I'm like, it's okay. Like, let them
Right.
ask. Because to Berkeley, if you're shushing your child, she's like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
You know? That
that's
they
good.
can't talk to me. So I'm
Right.
always like, let them ask. And even adults, ask me. I don't
Right.
care at all to explain what's going on. Because we do cart her through restaurants and it's like, we have to sit by a plug-in, you know, like, and people are always like,
We
what?
need a
And I'm like, we have
plug.
to sit by a plug-in. So we'll wait, but we need the
never
seat
thought
by the
of that.
plug-in.
Wow.
And you know, like we'll say it, but a lot of it's just ignorance of when you think of life
Yeah.
support, you think of a person who's actively dying.
Right. Oh, that's true. Not an active 3-year-old.
Not an active 3-year-old who's
Wow.
technically on life support, but it's so that she can live her life. It's
Right.
supporting her life. You know, it's
Wow.
not allowing
Not
her to
helping
not be
her
dead.
leave
I mean,
life.
it is, but
You're
you know.
right.
So I think a lot of it's ignorance. I didn't know much about a ventilator or a trach. If someone would have said a person on a ventilator, I instantly would have thought dying in a hospital,
Right.
or in a coma or
Yeah.
something. You know.
Well, I didn't even understand the trach totally and what
and
that is.
so
And yeah.
it's just that's why I
Wow.
share our story so openly on social media.
Yeah.
I get a lot of hate for that about it's not my life to share, but it is.
Right.
And at this point, I am sharing the blessing that God gave me
Yeah.
with the world. And I mean, and I always tell my husband, if that's wrong, I'll answer for it because it's spreading awareness. And I'm hoping that people will be able to be like, oh, hey, that's a trach and that's a ventilator. I've seen this, you know,
Right.
and
right.
explain it. But I hate when people are like, oh, don't go near her. And the funny things is like, it's not contagious because I've had parents be like, don't go over
contagious.
there. You'll catch whatever she has, you know, and it's like, she doesn't have a disease you're going to catch.
Right.
Um,
right.
You're not going to hurt her if you come play with her. Like kids on the playground are always afraid to play with her.
Right.
You know, like, and I'll say, oh, you can play with her. She's just a regular kid. It's
Right,
just, I know this
right.
is a scary tube. So we just, I don't ever want her to think something's wrong with her
Yeah.
because she's perfect the way that she is.
Right. Right.
And I also want to encourage other people to know, like, you can ask questions. And most
Yeah.
medical parents that I've come into contact with are completely okay with you asking questions.
right.
The thing that is really hard is when you're passing judgment on something you don't know anything about.
Right. Oh, that's a good point.
You know, like, don't
Right.
tell me how to take care of my kid when you've never been in my shoes. I know it's hard.
Right.
She's not attached to a leash. She's not a dog. Like, you know, like,
Right.
I'll joke and say, oh,
I
well,
love your
her
sense of humor with
cord's
that,
only
though.
4 foot long, you know, but it's like, it's one thing when I'm joking about it, but don't
Right.
call my child a dog.
Right.
You know,
Right.
just little things like that where I have really thick skin.
Yeah.
You know, I'm the oldest of 9 kids. Like, you cannot hurt my feelings. But some parents are very not as, they
Yeah.
don't have my sense of humor. I do have a dry sense of humor, and I'll give it and I can take it.
But that's
So
helped
I
you
do
walk through
not,
this too.
yes.
It's
So
like,
that's just like comments on social media and things like that. You know, like, it doesn't bother me at all, but it does raise awareness to the fact that it's just ignorance.
right.
A lot of times people just don't know. And for some reason,
Yeah.
humanity, that's our flaw. When we don't know, we instantly go negative.
Yeah.
We don't go positive. We instantly
Or
go
we
negative.
back up. Like, I
Yeah.
love what you were saying. I love that you touched on this because that was my other question of what do you tell someone who, anything that's unknown or different, where like we back up a little bit. And that's a lot of people with chronic illness or a disability of some kind or anything like that. It's like, well, we don't know what to say. And so I love that a child is like, children are like, oh, what
Kids
is
are the
that? Just right
best.
out there.
Yeah, or they'll be like, what's that noise? You know, and it's like,
Her
oh, that's
machine
the
or
machine. And yeah, and so I
But
love
you're
it when
so great to
kids,
even take time to explain it
yeah,
to because that will help them know, and then hopefully next time they won't be uncomfortable with
right.
someone. So, but what do you tell, that parent of, hey, don't be afraid of us, don't be afraid of my
Yeah.
child, or I don't know, what would you say?
Just to encourage your children to be inclusive of all kids, you know, like have
Wow.
them go say, hey, do you want to play? Because as the parent, if she can't, I'm going to say, oh my gosh, thank you for asking, but she can't.
Right,
You know,
right.
but if you never let your kid, if my kid plays on a playground for an hour and you don't ever let, you know, I can tell they want to come play, but you're not letting them, you know,
Wow.
that's teaching your child not to be inclusive. That's also teaching my child that she's not worthy of being played
Wow.
with.
Oh,
And she is.
wow.
So, you know, it's just, I get it. It's tough. I
Yeah.
think that just from my perspective, if I didn't want people to ask me questions about her, I wouldn't go out.
Right.
I
Ooh,
would keep her at home.
stay at home. It's right.
So I am okay. I'm opening the door for the questions by bringing her
Wow.
in public.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's how all parents with, you know, a child who
Right.
might be disabled or ill or whatever,
And
but
it's different for every family, like you said.
right.
Yeah.
But parents are pretty good to be like, you're going to
Yeah.
know if they don't want you over there. You know,
Right.
just common sense will tell you, like, we should back up. But
Yeah.
in her case, I mean, my biggest goal is to raise her to know that, like, she's perfect the way God made her
Wow.
and she's worthy of everything everybody else is worthy of.
Yeah. Wow.
So
Ooh, that's powerful. Any final thoughts on how you've seen God show up through all this? And there's a lot of
there's
layers
a
of
lot, yeah.
time alone, trusting, like you've already talked about, like being willing to knowing she might die any moment, any day, even now, and walking through that. But is there anything you would encourage someone just of, how you've looked to God through all this? And I'm sure there are some people who are like, well, I don't have faith. I don't need that. But what would you say to, anyone walking through that with faith or without faith?
Well, you saying like that, there are also people who could go the other way of like, why would God let this happen?
Oh, right, right.
And so to those people, I think it's really important to remember that like God uses everything that happens for good. You know, there is so much good that's come from Berkeley that never would have happened without her.
Wow.
And so at the time, I can't say that I was thinking, oh, this is great. I'm so joyful in the blessings that are coming. No, I probably didn't think that. But just remember that like God's got your back and
Wow,
you're being
right.
tested. If you are someone who has faith, you're being tested for something bigger. You know, when you think back to Bible stories, and then even now I can be reading a story and I'm like, gosh, this is such a little bitty trial compared to,
Wow.
whatever. But then without faith, I always felt so sad because you can see the people who have no hope
Right,
in the
right.
situation. And I mean, I don't know how to relate to that because I've had hope this whole time. I was never desolate or, depressed. But I would just say if you won't lean on God, even though I know He's got you, you might not trust Him, but He's got you. Lean on someone. Find someone who you love who maybe does have the faith to give you, and let them hold you up. Just don't try and do it alone. I know that God can use anybody to reach anybody. So even the most stubborn of people, He's going to find someone to reach out to you. So, I mean, I think the best advice I could give if you're someone who's like, I'm not going to depend on a God who would put me through this in the first place,
right?
Then find someone you can depend on and let them help you. Just don't try and do it by yourself.
Right. Oh, that's good. And you also have talked about just so many things to do, like intentionally look for community. Intentionally, you looked for another income source and literally,
you have to be
studied,
proactive,
to be able to get
and keep
another
busy.
degree. Yeah,
Keeping busy is important.
Or
Depression
that massage
is
and
hard to catch when you're running.
Right.
I ran from
That's
it.
good.
I ran from it because
Wow.
it would have been real easy to get depressed and lay in a bed all day and cry and feel sorry for myself.
And you could have done
I
that
could
in the
have.
hospital
Yeah,
room
I
with
could have.
her. Wow.
So just, practical tips aside from being any faith-based anything would just be, number one, get educated. Doctors are going to talk over your head. And so I rented a textbook, a NICU nursing textbook, and I learned what the words meant.
Wow.
And they learned real fast, you won't talk over my head. Like, you're not going to use big fancy words.
Yeah.
Go to rounds in the mornings. That's when the doctors will come around and talk about each patient in a place like an ICU. And so they'll talk about the day, what they're going to do, take notes, ask questions. If you don't know what questions to ask, find someone who's been there and ask them what questions to ask.
Good.
So it's just like you can't just sit there all day. The days are long.
Right.
The days are long, and they're not very eventful in most cases. And so just being educated on your situation, what you can ask, what you can't, find community, use social media, use, the hospitals have resources for you to reach out to people most of the time. Ask a social worker what resources they have. Ask what your hospital has. Do they have a food program that you can use? Some do, some don't. That helps cover the food cost. Yes, some have gas programs.
Wow.
But you won't know if you don't ask. And so, just asking what resources are available.
Yeah. Wow, this is also good. Wow.
Yeah, staying busy, getting hobbies, find something that you'd like to do. Teach yourself to crochet, teach yourself to knit, color in a color. Sometimes I would just color because it's a mindless thing to do, but it kept me busy.
Right.
One thing I didn't do that I wish, looking back on, I'm like, I should have done that, was like exercise.
Oh,
that would have helped me so much to get outside and exercise, but sometimes it was just all I could do to just go sit in the sunlight. But I never did exercise. I don't know why. I mean, I was in St. Louis, so it wasn't like I was going to walk too far. But, just finding ways to get outside and exercise.
Might not have been
and
safe.
Take care of yourself.
Right.
Drink water. Make sure you're eating. Like, there was days where I'd be like, did I eat today? I have no idea.
Oh, wow.
Like, make sure you're not physically making yourself ill.
Right. Right. Wow.
Yeah.
These are some amazing
Those are my tips.
Takeaways. Oh my goodness. Hasin, this has been I just feel like it's helped me even know more of, getting a glimpse on when there is a chronic illness and that just all the things that go along with it, medically and emotionally and just all the different strands with it. Your children, you talked about you and your husband not being around each other very much for almost a year. And, there's just a lot of strands with it and just some of the words of hope you gave us from the Bible. And I really thank you for being so open and sharing all this.
Yes.
Any final words for anybody? That was a lot. That was great.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me. I love to share and spread awareness, and that's what I hope to do through my social medias is, encourage people that might be going through this.
And you do. I just feel like even your pictures, I feel like your daughter's given me joy, just seeing her joy and her smile. And every child is mischievous and has, their things, but, she is
well, and those little
lives.
trach babies, they're a different kind of spunk. Wow. They really are.
What they have to be. They probably have had to fight to survive. Wow.
And they're just so fun.
Wow.
They're so sweet.
Wow.
final words would just be, what if you're just starting a trial, or if you're in the middle of it and you're like, when is this ever going to end? It will end. It could seem really long. I mean, that was like the longest year of my life, but now it seems like it was so long ago.
Wow.
And so, the trial doesn't last forever, and it will get better.
Wow.
Whether it's how you want it or not, it will get better.
Right.
So I just think just take it a day at a time. Just take it one day at a time. Just do one thing today. If it's taking a shower, take the shower.
Right.
And then tomorrow maybe you'll take a shower and eat a snack.
Right.
Just do one thing. Just get up with one goal. Don't try and do everything in one day.
Right.
Don't try and run the whole race. Just one day at a time, one thing at a time.
That's
and I know
good
as a
for
mom,
everybody.
it's bad to be like, well, I have to do all of the things.
Yeah.
Well, when you're in something like that, today may just be you have to get up, you have to take a shower, you have to go to the hospital. That's it.
Yeah.
And that's all your brain can handle. And just be okay with that.
Yeah.
So
that's great for any stage of life.
Yes.
And I just thank you again for sharing your story. And friend, I hope you've been encouraged today, whether you're walking through this kind of situation or you know someone who is, or you see a family and just knowing how to better relate to them. That has even helped me. So thank you for joining us. And I hope you join us next time on Thrive in the Mess.